Hello, Mr. Simpson back here again for our third video on Chapter 1, this time Section 3, Physical and Chemical Properties. Here are the learning objectives for this third section. As always, please make note, we really want to spend time in this video distinguishing between physical and chemical properties or changes and extensive and intensive properties. So first, what are properties? Let you think about that for a moment, how you would explain it. Basically, properties are characteristics that allow us to distinguish one substance from another. Characteristics that allow us to distinguish one substance from another. So as we think about those things, and we want to look at different substances, different types of matter, and think about how we classify them, we're going to do that by looking at their various properties. So properties can be either physical or chemical. So first here, physical property. So physical property is a characteristic of matter that is not associated with a change in its chemical composition. So you can observe this property without changing the substance, without changing the type of matter that you have. So some examples here. Color, mass, density. These are all observations that we can make or values that we can measure without changing the matter. Additionally, we know there's a distinction between properties of metals and nonmetals. These would fall into the category of physical properties. So things like lustrous, malleable, brittle. So these are all examples of physical properties. A physical change would be an example of a phase change. So when you change a solid to a liquid to a gas, you are not changing the substance, you're just changing the phase or state of that substance. So that would be an example of a physical change. That means, to add to some more properties here, some common physical properties along those lines of phase changes would be boiling point or melting point. So that covers physical, whether we're talking properties or changes. Now let's talk for a second about chemical. In this case, chemical property. Chemical property is the change, or it could also be the inability to change one type of matter into another type. So think for a second about examples. Flammability is a common one. Also, probably the most common is reactivity. A chemical change is more commonly known as, in the world of chemistry, a chemical reaction. Because now we are changing the properties of the substance. We're making a change that changes the matter that we're looking at. Okay, so the final distinction that we need to make at this point is the difference between extensive and intensive physical properties. So extensive depends on the amount of matter present. So common ones here obviously are mass and volume. The more matter I have, the greater the mass will be. Intensive physical properties are just the opposite. So intensive properties do not depend on the amount of matter present. Again, they do not depend on the amount of matter present. These are actually very important to us because they help us to identify unknown substances. So some examples here: density, melting point. So now, no matter how much matter I have of some unknown metal, let's say, I can always determine its density. And then once I know its density, I could use that value to identify the metal. This is a very common lab that you may have performed in high school, and something that we will look at in this course as well. Same thing goes for a property like melting point. I can evaluate the melting point of some unknown substance and then refer to a reference material to determine the identity of that substance based on its melting point temperature. And finally, in this unit, as it pertains to properties, a quick look at the periodic table. Obviously, we will spend lots of time with the periodic table as we move through this course. But with regards to properties, you can see how the elements on the periodic table are arranged based on differences in properties. Very basically here, the colors that you see on this particular periodic table separate the metals from the non-metals, and then in between there are the metalloids, which would experience properties of both metals and non-metals. Okay, that wraps up section 3 of chapter 1. I will see you next time.